There's a certain irony to the fact that although Baal drew the shortest straw when choosing his deific power and domain compared to Bane and Myrkul, coming in last, that he is perhaps best known of the Dead Three. Because of all things, his appearance, largely indirect in the original Baldur's Gate games, which has made Baal more familiar to even those not well steeped in the lore of the Forgotten Realms than his technically more powerful allies and companions, Bane and Myrkul. More on that later. You probably know the ancient history of the Dead Three by now like the back of your hand, but let's go over the basics one last time. Baal was once a mortal, who along with his fellow mortals Bane and Myrkul swore a pact of cooperation and mutual benefit in a quest to become a god. Together they slew a lost god, and journeyed to the Grey Waste to confront Jurgal himself, the Lord of the End of Everything, whereupon Jurgal willingly resigned and divided his power and responsibilities among the mortals. They had played the divine game of knucklebones, and Baal had lost to both Bane and Myrkul. But even so, he found a way to find his triumph, stating, "You think you have won, but I choose death. I can destroy your kingdom, Bane, by murdering your subjects, and I can starve your kingdom, Myrkul, by staying my hand." During his reign as god of death and murder, Baal accumulated a wide variety of the most despicable mortals within his fold: common thugs and murderers, sophisticated assassins, absolute sociopaths, and more. And Baal's cult was feared and despised for the centuries of his tenure as Lord of Murder, all of which came to a screeching halt with the infamous Time of Troubles, which, as you know by now, was precipitated by Bane and Myrkul's theft of Eu's Tablets of Fate, whereupon the Overgod cast all the gods down from their realms, and here is where the story of Baal gets interesting. All three dark gods, either by design or happenstance, turned out to have some backup plan to keep themselves alive should the worst come to pass. As you know, Bane was slain during the Time of Troubles, but his own son, Iaktu-Xvim, was the engine of his resurrection, and Myrkul had escaped into an ancient evil artifact called the Crown of Horns. Well, Baal too had a backup plan, and in 1358, during the Time of Troubles, having lost his powers and having been forced to walk Faerun like the rest of the gods, Baal was slain by an upstart mortal called Cyric, using the avatar of yet another god, Mask, disguised as a sword named Godsbane. In doing so, Cyric stole Baal's divinity and portfolio, something that was later codified in an official capacity by the overgod Eu, who appointed Cyric the new god of strife, murder, and the dead. In a similar fashion to Myrkul, Baal's essence was dispersed into a local source upon his death. In this case, the waters under what would become the infamous scene of the crime, Boresker Bridge, which blackened with the taint of the slain god, rendering the water underneath it poisonous. But as alluded to prior, Baal had in some sense foreseen this moment, and in preparation had impregnated a slew of mortal women. The spawn of these women would become known as the Baal spawn, and would be immortalized in video game history in the series called Baldur's Gate, which, just in case you haven't heard of it, was the inspiration for Baldur's Gate 3. And this was prophesied by the sage Alando. The Lord of Murder shall perish, but in his doom he shall spawn a score of mortal progeny. Chaos will be sown from their passing, so saith the wise Alando. This all culminated in what is sometimes referred to as the Baalspawn crisis in 1369, where many Baalspawn duked it out for supremacy in an attempt to claim the title of true heir to the Lord of Murder. But all of these plots were foiled by a fellow Baalspawn, one Abdel Adrian, who had managed to resist the taint inside of him, defeating his fellow Baalspawn and ultimately deciding, at least he believed, to surrender his divine power to the planes of good rather than to keep it and ascend to divinity himself, something that turned out to be far more complicated than he had initially believed. Over 100 years later, while serving as Grand Duke of Baldur's Gate, Abdel Adrian was attacked by the last Baalspawn called Vikang, whose existence he had not been aware of, as he had believed himself to be the last. It was unknown which of the two men died in the battle, but it was clear that the victor had transformed into the Slayer, a monstrous creature, an avatar associated with Baal. The creature was subsequently defeated by the combined efforts of the Watch of Baldur's Gate and a band of visiting adventurers, and Abdel was later buried with honors. But with the last two Baalspawn in the realms having died, Baal finally returned to life, albeit significantly diminished in power, just like Bane and Myrkul. Now, the Baalspawn crisis would take up a video in and of itself, and maybe I'll cover it one day. But suffice to say, it granted Baal greater familiarity and infamy than Bane or Myrkul combined ever had. And it's an interesting question to ask just how much of that will transfer over into Baldur's Gate 3, as BG3 most certainly is a different game with a different plot. But I still think that the legacy of Baal and the Baalspawn is such a remarkable occurrence in both Forgotten Realms history and video game history that it would be difficult to pass up the opportunity to at least reference it in Baldur's Gate 3. What role Baal will have in BG3 is anyone's guess, but it will likely be subtly different from that of Bane and Myrkul, as despite their common origin, they all are ultimately very different figures. And they're more than just that. They're rivals to each other, because make no mistake, whatever alliance they historically have had, each would be happy to gobble up the other if they could. And history has proven this. For example, during the Time of Troubles, Myrkul and his clergy cast a powerful necromantic spell, snuffing out the existence of all the assassins of the realms to power Bane, in his efforts to reacquire the Tablets of Fate, and thus immediately depreciating the power of Baal in the process. The Dead Three are thoroughly evil, and thus prone to betrayal, and it will be very interesting to see how that dynamic plays out, if at all, in Baldur's Gate 3, and how much influence we'll have as players on the plots they spin. As always, thank you for tuning in. Please leave a like, comment, and subscribe, as it really helps with the channel, and I will check you out later. Take care.